Well, welcome back to Men's Fraternity. This happens to be our last week, if you're watching this video for this semester, our last week of meeting until the new year. So we're hoping you've had a good semester. We've worked through the book of Evangelism in the last 4 weeks, 3 weeks plus now. We have been doing the definition of manhood out of this old book that we used years ago, like 12 or 13 years ago. This book was our study, and we went through an entire year, a fall and a spring, through all of this. Part of what this did was help show us a definition of manhood from the Scriptures, looking at the problems that men face in our world, the calling that God has on their life. How do we accomplish those goals? And out of that we get this definition of manhood, which is reject passivity. That's the first thing we talked about. Men need to reject passivity. The second thing is accept responsibility. So once I've rejected my passiveness as a man, and remember that comes out of the curse. When Adam and Eve fell, part of the curse was that man would live kind of in the mode that Adam did with his wife Eve when he did not stand up and reject his passivity. Now that's landed on us, and we carry that with us in our sinful nature. The other side of that is you accept responsibility, and that's what Christ showed us, that He took responsibility that wasn't even His own. Christ, in fact, took the responsibility that we owed back. He took the responsibility of our sin, paid for that sin for us, and then gives us the command to live as He did. And so our new mode of living toward our wives is to accept the responsibilities that we have as men, toward our work, toward our wives, toward our church. Then not only do we reject passivity, accept responsibility, but last week Pastor Tyler talked to us about leading courageously. So authentic men lead courageously. We look at what God has called us to do, and we take ownership of that. We take responsibility for it, and we lead out. We take forward steps in what we're supposed to do. The end of that definition is what we're going to talk about today, and that is an authentic man, a biblical man, one who's going to walk in the shadow of Christ, not in the shadow of Adam, is one that is going to expect the greater reward, God's reward. That's the way that book described it. Expect the greater reward. Sometimes we say live with the end in mind, but it's even really fuller than that. It's not really trying to just capture a picture of what's at the end. It really gets to what's going on today, because that can leave us kind of future and not practical. But it really is practical, because we want to capture something today. What's my motivation for living today? If I'm going to expect God's greater reward, the real question becomes, what is my pursuit today? What am I pursuing now? And so we're going to be looking at a passage in Matthew chapter 16, kind of as the base passage for where we're going to go. If you want to go ahead and start turning there, you can. But here's the question I want to ask while you're doing that. Is it wrong to pursue pleasure and joy? A lot of times when we start thinking about the Christian life and being a Christian man and embracing authentic manhood, what we do is we start thinking, well, I've got to give up all the fun stuff, and I've got to start doing all the hard stuff. And that's what it means to be a Christian man. And I think we've got that backwards. I think what it means is we are supposed to pursue the right thing, which happens to be a person, Jesus Christ. And if we give ourselves a new affection, then we get to pursue pleasure in the right way. We get to pursue joy in the right way. We're not giving up things that we don't want to do things that we wish we didn't have to as authentic or biblical men. We get to go hard after what we're made for, and we're made to follow Jesus. And when we trust Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, the call is not to do a bunch of duty for Him. The call is not to go out and start doing stuff you don't enjoy. The call is to pursue Him or to follow Him. And so we've got to learn to make our affection Jesus Christ and the pursuit of Christ. And when we do that, we're going to experience the greater reward. We can then expect the greater reward. So think back. I talked to you a while back in sermons in Matthew chapter 5 In Matthew chapter 5, you have those Beatitudes. And if you'll remember some of them, I'm just going to read 2 or 3 of them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Those begin to sound like hard things. It starts to sound like duty when you read that. These are my obligations, right? And they don't sound fun. Like that doesn't sound like somebody that's expecting a reward. But I think it's because we put the exclamation point in the wrong place. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and we put the exclamation point after poor in spirit. I'm a Christian man, so I should be poor in spirit. I'm a Christian man, so I should mourn. I'm a Christian man, so I've got to be gentle. That means I've got to do away with all my kind of courage and boldness. I'm a Christian man, so I've got to hunger and thirst after righteousness. And righteousness is not fun things; it's hard things. And we put an exclamation point right there. But what if we move that exclamation point and put it after blessed? Because blessedness is knowing and understanding and abiding in the deep joy of God. And so Jesus is saying, you are blessed. You are joyful in God. You are in a place where you get to enjoy the greatest experience of your life, which is relationship with God. And blessed are you who are poor in spirit. And that's the quality, right, of our Christian existence. But the motivation is blessedness. Pursue the joy. For the joy that is ours, it's okay if you're poor in spirit. It's okay if you mourn. It's okay if there's gentleness. It's okay if those things exist, because you're doing it for this great joy, this great experience. So you're learning to expect the greater reward. Now, I told you to turn to Matthew chapter 16. In Matthew 16 is a call to discipleship. And much of Matthew is about a call to discipleship. Matthew himself was a disciple. And in some ways, he's telling the story of Jesus from his perspective as a follower of his. And so when you get to Matthew 16, you get kind of this culminating call of discipleship. And Jesus says it this way in verse 24. Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul?" And again, we read that call to discipleship and we emphasize the obligation or the duties of discipleship. We start thinking about, well, I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to do this if I'm going to follow Jesus. In fact, he's saying, if you want to follow me, you've got to lose your life. But again, the emphasis is placed in the wrong part for us. Jesus is placing the emphasis on the motivation. Follow me. If you want to follow me, and as a believer, we want to follow Jesus. If you want to follow me, then yes, you deny yourself, and yes, you take up a cross, and then you can follow me daily. But it's the motivation of following Him, the joy of being in His presence, the joy of having a right relationship with Him that causes me to say, I'm willing to lay down these other things because what I'm getting is so much better. C.S. Lewis says this: we are far too easily pleased. See, the problem is not that we aren't dutiful enough in our Christian existence to find joy in following Jesus. The problem is we settle for pleasures that are too small. We're willing to accept fake pleasures and small pleasures instead of pursuing the greatest pleasure, which is Jesus Himself. And when we can get our affections set right, when we can begin to pursue Jesus properly, then pursuing Him, going hard after Him, the discipline things, the pursuit of holiness doesn't become obligation and duty. It actually becomes a delightful thing. The pursuit of holiness is the pursuit of lasting happiness in God, one author said. The pursuit of holiness is the pursuit of lasting happiness in God. If I were to say, men, we've got to learn to be more holy, the first thing that comes to your mind is a bunch of duties that you've got to ascribe to. I've got to read my Bible every day. I've got to pray every day. I've got to give my tithe. I've got to go to the church and serve. You begin to think of all these duties. But when our affection is really set on just following Jesus and being in a relationship to Him and God properly, then our pursuit of holiness ends up being really our pursuit of happiness. We can go hard after the great reward. And that's what we want to do. We want to expect the great reward. So go hard after the great reward, and holiness becomes part of that. The denial of self becomes part of that, right? Thomas Chalmers is an old Puritan, and he wrote a book rather entitled The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. And the purpose of his book was to say, the way you defeat sin in your life, the way you stop settling for temporary pleasure, the way you stop being too easily pleased, is you find a new affection. And that a new affection is Jesus, and it's a lasting affection. It's the great reward. It's the expectation of the greater reward. So we need the expulsive power of a new affection. The call is not go do things that aren't pleasurable. The call of the greater reward, the call of the authentic man, is go after the lasting pleasures. Go do the things that will bring you the greatest reward. That's the way we kind of outline our lives anyway. We go do things that bring us joy and happiness, and we try to avoid the things that we don't enjoy. And if you put church and following Jesus and your relationship with Him as something that's not an enjoyable thing, that's when you begin to kind of push it to the outskirts and go do other things that seem more fun. But you're settling for something small. You're not expecting the greater reward. And an authentic man, he'll love his wife, he'll attend his church, he'll raise his children, he'll be a godly grandfather, he'll serve his local body, because not of duty and holiness, but out of delight for Jesus. It's what it looks like to follow Jesus. It's what it looks like to walk in the shadow of Jesus. Authentic manhood sets its sight on this new and greater affection. If you want to warm that in your soul over the break, I'll encourage you to read a book or two. You might want to read this book, Christ Formed in You by Brian Hedges. It's a great book anyway, but there's a chapter or two in here that really speak to this, and it would help warm you to this concept and this idea. If you really want to dig in deep, I might recommend this book to you, Desiring God by John Piper. In Desiring God, what John Piper is doing is making the argument for you and I to be a Christian hedonist, which means pursue the pleasure of God with all your might. And so in this text, he takes this concept that we're talking about and really fleshes it out. It may take 2 readings to really absorb what he's saying here, but it's worth the time, it's worth the energy if you want to do that, to really understand what it looks like to have the greater reward in your sight and pursue hard after it. And then you say, well, maybe I'm kind of in between that. This is a John Piper book also. It's called Don't Waste Your Life. And in it, he's really taking Desiring God and giving some application. And he's really taking that Matthew 16 text, that call to discipleship, and saying, that's not a waste of life. God's not calling you to throw your life away and then just spend it in Jesus. He's saying you really don't gain your life until you pursue Jesus. And so it's not a waste of life to go hard after Jesus. So Don't Waste Your Life really helps you understand, I think, Matthew 16 and its call really fully. So those would be some books that you would maybe enjoy reading over the Christmas break. Again, we've had a good semester, and we look forward to seeing you again in January.